Hello everyone and welcome to another ModellingSeb video. In the last video I turned up the visual interest on this model to 11, with a large amount of oil modulation. This has turned out quite well and complemented the previously applied post shade. After all the oil work is done, it's time to make this model look heavy. This means I wanted to actually look as if it is a 1941 model T-34 that has experienced over 3 years of frontline combat on both sides. However, to begin, I want to address this giant wooden storage box first. This box has some amazing molding, which makes it very easy to paint since the raised details themselves will allow for a more worn look on those specific parts. This is far easier than trying to simulate wood grain texture on a flat surface. But before I can start on anything, I need to first off mask this area. Tamiya masking tape is perfect for this job since it comes in various thicknesses, so no cutting is necessary to make the tape fit. The tape is also very sticky, which is a benefit since it means that it won't randomly begin to peel during the painting process. This has been a problem I have observed with other masking tapes I've used in the past. After all the edges are masked off, I can begin with airbrushing with Tamiya flat white. Because this is applied on top of black primer, it will work as a sort of pre-shade. This will help in creating more difference between the planks since white allows for a worn wood effect to be made much more easily. Using a wood grain stencil, I spray some Tamiya Deck Brown. This colour is very good at simulating darker wood, however if I were to do this next time I would have changed the colour a bit. This is because Deck Brown is slightly too red for my liking, but it still does the job well. Following this, the other plank is sprayed with a different stencil pattern. This creates much more difference between the two planks. The main effect is created by using MIG Ammo oil paints. These oil brushes are really good in my opinion compared to other out-of-the-tube oil paints. This is because these paints contain much less oil. This makes them much faster to work with, meaning that you need to drain them for a fraction of the time you do other oil paints. The colours Dark Brown and Starship Base Sludge will both be used to create the base colour of the wood. The buff will be used later for chipping and making the wood look much more worn. The top plank receives Starship Base Sludge as a relatively thicker coat. A thicker coat not only ensures a full coverage but also allows some of the underlying effect to still be visible. This means by adjusting the thickness of the coat you can make the wood look much more worn. The bottom plank receives the darker brown tone which is spread across the whole plank. Since these two colours are so similar, I decided to add a pin wash to more clearly separate the two planks. This doesn't exactly bring the desired effect I wanted, but it will do for now. To make the plank look more worn, I take the buff oil paint and with a very thin brush apply it in a chipping manner. I outline a few edges that would have worn down easily. Although the effect is not perfect, it is very easy and works amazingly on smaller parts such as this, since the wood is not the main visual attraction but a complementary piece of the model. This also means that the darker colour was chosen since I wanted the model to end up quite dusty. If I ended up choosing a lighter wood tone, the dust would simply blend in with the wood, which is not what I wanted. The removal of the masking tape is very easy and I don't fear any paint peeling off. If you have enjoyed the video so far, then do consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel as I will be trying to post more frequently in the upcoming future. Also, the Modeller's Discord server, which is linked down below, has just started a new group build themed around snow and winter. If this does sound interesting to you, then feel free to join. Painting the chipping by brush is a very long and tedious process. There are many alternatives such as hairspray chipping, which I couldn't have done due to the 5-layer post shade applied to the model. This is because the paint would simply be too thick to remove since barely any water would be able to reach the hairspray. This means that acrylic chipping was the way to go. I could have used VMS reverse chipping, however I do not own any bottles of it, so that will have to wait for the next model I will make. Now, acrylic chipping has a couple methods or hacks to it. These make acrylic chipping much easier to do. Most of you will be aware of the sponge chipping method. This is probably the go-to method for most, and I can understand why, but for this particular model I wanted to completely brush chip it. Brush chipping has never been my strong suit in scale modelling, so I hope that this model will help me learn a bit and improve my skills. The very first chipping colour is made from a mix of Vallejo German Camo Bright Green and Deck Tan. This very bright, almost grass green colour does work pretty well for the artificial chips. It is a bit bright, but it will be toned down by the rust washers. So in the end it doesn't stand out as much as it looks here. Artificial chipping is the top layer of chips. Those that haven't gone deep enough to reach the raw steel underneath, but those that did expose a lighter paint. Of course I will be adding darker rust chips into those artificial chips. This makes them almost borders or guides of sorts for where the rust chips need to go. The artificial chips are done with the same brush I use for wood chipping. This is because it gives me quite a good bit of control. It also makes these long vertical chips much more easy to make. This is one of the benefits of brush chipping over using a sponge, since a sponge will only create singular individual chipping dots. Of course the best method would be combining the two, but hey, I already started so I might as well finish. The dark rust chips are made from Vallejo Panzer Ace's dark rust. This is an amazing rust colour and Vallejo is probably one of the best paints for brush chipping. Airbrushing Vallejo paint is a bit questionable at times, but at least for me it's the undefeated best acrylic paint for brushes. The dark rust is again painted using the same brush as the other two chipping colours before it. However, I do now realise that I could have used a slightly larger brush for the artificial chips, since making these rust chips fit inside was quite challenging. But I suppose we learn from our mistakes. The rust chips really add to the model looking heavy and metal in a way. The contrast with the other colours of the model does help in showing this. However, the chipping alone does seem to stand out a bit, so that means I have to blend it in somehow. The best way to blend in rust tones is to use a rust enamel wash. I use MIG Ammo Streaking Rust. This is a fantastic rust wash and a must-have for any modeler out there. Small amounts of the rust wash are applied to the model over the dark rust. Then, without letting them dry, I take a brush that has been dampened with white spirit and begin to blend the enamel effects in. This is very simple to do since the whole blending process is removing any excess rust effect. So with a dabbing motion, I try to blend the chips in. The effect will be heavy, but again, this is what I'm aiming for. A tank that has served for 3 years in intensive combat would most likely be heavily battered. So at least to me this makes sense. If you are more into making your models look realistic, then this is probably too heavy for you. But I personally prefer an artistic interpretation that makes the model look more visually interesting. Now with the main part of the chipping out of the way, I decided to start painting the tools. These are German tools that were added on whilst the tank was in German service. This is important since it means that the colour of these tools was not the same as the base colour of the tank. Some countries primed their tanks with the tools on, such as America, but I also believe this might be the case with some Soviet tanks, but I am not 100% sure of this fact. To begin with, I used a slightly different shade of grey than I did for the tyres in the last part of this series. This applied to all the tools that would have either remained the same raw steel colour or that would have been primed in a grey. This includes the head of the shovel and the wire cutters, as well as the hooks, I believe that's what they are, and the lifting jack. German wire cutters were covered with Bakelite. This means that these wire cutters could cut wires that had an electrical current going through them without electrocuting the user. This gives them a distinct red shade which is very unique and draws your eyes to the tools. This adds a bit more history to this model and makes its service in the German army more visible. Wood is painting using Vallejo Iraqi sand and brown sand. These two are blended over each other whilst they are still wet. The camera isn't great at picking these details up, but it does give a subtle wood grain effect to the shovel handle. The last detail that needs to be painted are the exhausts. The exhausts on the T-34 are a bit annoying to work with since they are mostly covered up and very little of them is visible. Compare this to exhausts of tanks like the Panzer IV and the Tiger, where the exhausts can have much more done to them, allowing for a much smoother blend of effects from top to bottom. However, for these exhausts I have to leave it up to the interpretation of the person looking at the model to imagine that there is a smooth transition towards the opening. The base colour of the exhaust is the exact same as the tools. This is not done for consistency but just because it's easier. With the whole exhaust painted, I then apply a very watery wash of a slightly lighter and bluer acrylic glaze. This adds a bit more colour and texture to the exhaust. With this done, I then take some incinerated white from Life Color. This is a warmer white tone which is perfect for replicating the whitened colour of steel that has been affected by heat. This is chipped in the same way that the artificial chips were. This is then followed by a second layer of dark rust chips. Exhausts rust extremely quickly due to the combination of heat and them being open to the elements. Painting small exhausts such as this is very quick and easy, and with them complete you can attach them to the model. With the exhaust attached onto the model, I can now add the enamel effects. These are the same as I used for the chipping using MIG Ammo Streaking Rust. However, unlike the chipping, these are not so small and rust should be fresher. In order to do this, I use the wet application method and mix MIG Ammo Light Rust enamel effect over the top of the streaking rust. This allows for the two effects to mix together and to form a not only blended tone of rust, but also allows for the tones to be different along the whole exhaust. This being combined with the underlying effects make these exhausts look quite nice, and this is followed by the saddest part of having to lock them away behind the covers. But they still stand out pretty nicely. Finally, the last part of this video and final step for now is the chipping of the welds. Welds do not rust, and as a result they do not chip down to this rust colour but rather to the original silver colour of the welds themselves. To replicate this, I take some Vallejo silver and slightly chip a few sections of the welds. This colour does stand out very much, so I try not to overdo this effect. But with the welds now fully chipped, the first part of the weathering is now over. I really hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. With me now back at the workbench and having much more free time, you should expect more videos to come out very soon. The next T-34 video is already being worked on right now, so if you don't want to miss it, then make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any more. Once again, thank you all for watching and goodbye.